Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, October 29th, 2020, and today we're going to be going through my second to last 2020 Senate election prediction. We are 5 days away from the 2020 presidential election, which of course brings in numerous Senate races. I think we're up to a total of 35. Yeah, I mean, it's right here. I don't know why I'm not reading. We have 2 Senate races in Georgia. That's because there is a special election up and an additional Senate race in the state of Arizona. These are the 2 Senate special elections this election season. If I'm wrong about that, please correct me in the comments down below. But I believe those are the only 2 seats that are considered to be toss-ups. Not toss-ups, definitely not, that are considered to be the special elections of this election year. So, to be completely honest with you, we have so many toss-up seats now that honestly half the map is filled with toss-ups. I think we've hit 17 states that are not considered to be safe, and that is traditionally unheard of. I mean, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have never been at a point where, we see roughly half of the Senate map competitive. We'll talk about that once we actually get into it. We're going to characterize all of the safe states really quickly. I'm saying really quickly because there aren't that many. New Hampshire, New Mexico, and Virginia. These are 3 states that I'd like to take a point to discuss very briefly, just because 3 of these states should have never been competitive, should have never been safe from the beginning. But due to the fact that the GOP failed to field strong candidates in any of the 3 races, these have moved to being safe for the Democrats. They started off widely expected to be competitive, especially with New Mexico being an open seat. It's a done deal for the Democrats. For the Republican Party, they have some safe states as well. Some of these may come as a surprise. Some of these that are not considered safe may come as a surprise, but I think that Kentucky is probably the most surprising state that I would consider to be safe for the GOP. Now, I understand Amy McGrath is a name well known amongst the National Democratic Party, but in Kentucky, she didn't have much in her own 6th congressional district in a wave year. On top of that, I understand she was working against a Republican climate, but that's exactly what she's doing statewide. Nothing has fundamentally changed about her race, except that she's running against a long-term incumbent. So while Mitch McConnell may be unpopular, Democratic policies are definitely not more popular in Kentucky. And also, Kentucky's a perfect representation of why you shouldn't look blindly at party registration as how you expect votes to go, because there's a lot more registered Democrats than Democrats are going to win votes in Kentucky this election season. So, Amy McGrath, unfortunately for her, $50 million, I would say, down the drain, because that race, while she may be a national figure and very well may end up on a CNN panel at some point, other than that, I really don't think she's going to get elected to the United States Senate. She really should have waited for another House here or even ran for the House this election season. But again, that was entirely up to her. That puts the Republicans at 40 Republican seats. The Democrats are at 44. Like I said, roughly half the map is considered competitive. These 16 toss-up races are either likely, lean, or tilt. I'm not doing any toss-up states, which is why you don't see the little yellow indicator on the map, so we are going to be characterizing every race. Now, we have 1 race flip and 1 other race rating change, so really, if you don't want to hear me, actually, I probably won't repeat main points. I mean, we've gotten closer to the election, so things certainly have changed, but if you do want to skip to the end, I would completely understand. But let's get into the likely Democratic states. These are states that are going to put the Democrats very close to victory because they have made inroads in certain Republican states and certain states with Republican incumbents that honestly, I am impressed by the amount of support that we've seen for the Democratic candidates here. So before we get into the states with Republican incumbents, we're going to talk about Minnesota and we're going to talk about Michigan. These are 2 states the Democratic Party needs to retain if they want a chance at winning back the majority. These are 2 states that they currently hold. There's Gary Peters in Michigan. There's Tina Smith in Minnesota. Tina Smith is a newly elected Democrat from the state of Minnesota. She replaced Senator Al Franken, who resigned amidst sexual assault allegations. And in Michigan, well, that's a state where Gary Peters is running for re-election. He was last elected back in 2014. So he survived a Republican wave year, and it looks like he's going to be cruising to victory in a Democratic wave year, despite what the right-wing media would like to tell you, or an off poll from Trafalgar Group. This race is not going to the GOP. If it goes to the GOP, that'll probably be one of the biggest polling upsets of this election cycle. And while 2016 did give us some polling upsets, Michigan was not the prime subject, and it more than likely will not be in this election. So Michigan and Minnesota, both likely for the Democrats. We have 2 more likely states. That puts the Democrats at 48 seats. Now, this comes from, can you guess the first one? Colorado. This is a state where the Democratic Party is expected to heavily win on the presidential margin. We're talking double digits for Joe Biden. And then in the state of Arizona, an additional state to the Democrats, this is a race where Martha McSally is running. If you recognize her name, it's not without reason. She ran back in 2018, and I covered this race. And I actually predicted that Kyrsten Sinema was going to pick up that seat very narrowly. And I mean, she did outrun my prediction, but I did say that the Democrats were going to win in Arizona. So I'd say my track record is okay with that state. I got the governor's race. I got the Senate race. I didn't make predictions for each individual House race, but it wasn't too far off. And when we're looking at the House of Representatives, I think that's a very good indicator of how the state is moving as well. The 2nd district went from being McSally's district down to being safe Democrat for this election cycle. I mean, it flipped, and now it's safe for the Democrats. The 6th district in Arizona is actually getting very competitive, and I will say that Arizona as a whole is moving rapidly towards the left. In 2012, Mitt Romney won the state of Arizona by nearly double digits. Following that election, 2016 came around. And while Donald Trump moved the entire country to the right, Arizona swung around 6 points to the Democrats. Then 2018 rolls around, it swings an additional 5 points to the Democrats to a point where they win a Senate race, a race held by a Republican. And now they're on track to win another one. Martha McSally lost that 2018 Senate race and then was nominated by the governor following John McCain's passing. This is probably one of the worst plays the Republican Party could have made in Arizona, and they are paying the price for it. So Arizona, Colorado, Michigan, and Minnesota are all likely states for the Democrats. That's it in terms of likely states for the Democrats, but the GOP does have a pretty reliant base in some of these key states. I mean, Mississippi obviously isn't going to the Democratic Party. It's just not going to be safe for the GOP. Neighboring Alabama is likely to elect Tommy Tuberville. While I do expect Doug Jones to do much better than Joe Biden, he's still a Democrat in a traditionally Republican state, and it's very similar to what we saw with a number of Democrats in the 2014 Senate races. When they were in states such as Arkansas, really across the country, and they were incumbents, they faced firm Republican opposition. Now, not to say this election is comparable as it's a Republican wave year, because it absolutely isn't. It's quite the opposite. But Alabama itself is a state that voted for Trump by 30% in 2016, and even if Trump wins the state by only 20, it's not enough to land Doug Jones over the victory. So Alabama, Mississippi, 2 states that I would say the GOP is going to win by a likely margin, which means 5 to 15%. Now, not exactly neighboring, but in the same region, the state of Texas, I would say, is likely as well. MJ Hegar is significantly underperforming Joe Biden in this state. Even in polls that Biden is ahead in Texas, she is losing to John Cornyn. Now, John Cornyn may not necessarily be the most inspirational Republican, nor is he as well known as Senator Ted Cruz. But MJ Hegar is no Beto O'Rourke, and while many Democrats would like her race to be competitive, at the end of the day, people in Texas are much more opposed to Donald Trump as president than they are to a Republican being in the United States Senate. The reason why this state is competitive, along with Arizona and Georgia, is because Republican Party voters that previously voted for Romney and McCain, who may have voted third party or even voted for Hillary Clinton, are now supporting the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. Those 3 states, I mentioned them because they all shifted to the left following the 2012 election. Texas by, I believe, 7-8%. So we have 3 likely Republican states, and the state that I'm not going to characterize as likely anymore is the state of Alaska. As we've seen in the past couple of days, this race is probably going to narrow up. There's the whole issue as to whether or not he's the Republican incumbent, Dr. Al Gross, is going to be listed as a Democrat or not, and I believe that he will still be listed as an independent. He did win the Democratic primary, the Alaskan Independence Democratic primary. I believe the Libertarian primary was included as well. It's a very weird primary system because those parties have pretty much coalesced against the Republicans, but Al Gross does have a very realistic shot, and I feel like I'm underestimating him on my prediction, and this state is probably going to narrow up to being only a 9-point margin for Donald Trump. So I can imagine that a senator who isn't exactly that well known with a very good opponent, I'd say, is probably still going to win because it still is Alaska, but it won't be by this likely margin that I believe could happen. Now, it's possible before Election Day that it does expand. I mean, we're talking low 5s at this point, or high 4s, just getting it barely up to down to lean, but not to say that the Republican Party can absolutely bring this back to a likely margin. It's just as it stands today, I say that this is probably lean. We're talking 4.5 to 5 points for the GOP and roughly 8 to 9 points for Donald Trump. So like I said, Donald Trump is bringing down Republicans across the country, and we're seeing it even in solid Republican states. Now, if you've noticed, I haven't characterized Kansas as a state solid for the GOP. I mean, it's not solid. It's not likely. It's lean. And the reason for that is because Barbara Boyer, while may have had some faltered debate performances, is still a strong candidate in this state. Not to mention the fact that Roger Marshall isn't exactly that much stronger than Chris Kobach. Now, if it was Chris Kobach, this race would probably be lean for the Democrats. Now, that's the reason why Mitch McConnell spent millions of dollars opposing Chris Kobach's nomination. He lost the governorship for the Republicans back in 2018, and he was on track to lose the 2020 Senate election for them as well. So Kansas, I'd say, is a state that should be paid attention to. But at the end of the day, I don't think it'll go to the Democrats. So Kansas is lean. Alaska is lean. That puts the Democrats at 48. Well, they remain at 48. The Republicans are now at 45. This leaves 7 toss-up seats. Since I've just characterized some lean Republican states, let's go to one lean Democratic state. And honestly, I don't think that this state surprises too many people. The state of Maine, which is traditionally Democrat, actually has a pretty strong candidate for the Democrats, but a pretty strong candidate for the GOP as well. Susan Collins, who lost a very significant portion of support from her constituency following her voting for Trump's tax cuts, as well as Supreme Court nominee at the time, Brett Kavanaugh. That really separated her ties with the state of Maine. She last won her reelection bid by 34% or 37%. 30s. I mean, we were talking insane margins for the GOP candidate here. And, Susan Collins was loved across the state. And honestly, there's a reason why this election is her most competitive election in history. Not even her first Senate election was this competitive. Not only is it competitive, but she is on track to lose. Sarah Gideon has served as Speaker of the House in the state of Maine. And as we're looking at it as a state that's going to probably determine part of the balance of power, the Democratic Party has funded millions upon millions of dollars into this race. So Maine is going to the Democrats. And while I think it'll be a narrow margin, it'll likely end the Republican slew of people in the northeastern region, at least in the United States Senate. 2016 was when Kelley lost the New Hampshire Senate race. We probably won't see another Republican in Massachusetts unless we see, 2010 come back from the grave. And if we're looking at, Maine, and we're looking at Vermont, and we're looking at Connecticut and Rhode Island, I really don't see a Republican winning there in the near future. Governorships are a whole nother ballgame, but that's not what we're worrying about. So Maine goes to the Democrats. Michigan, Minnesota, Colorado, Arizona. These are competitive races where the Democrats are currently leading. But let's go into another Trump Republican, not necessarily Trump, but I guess you could say that, Republican lean race. Now, the next state I'd say is lean for the GOP is actually South Carolina. I think that this one actually shocks a lot of people because if you haven't been keeping up on social media about competitive Senate races, you probably don't know that South Carolina is extremely competitive. Right now, Jamie Harrison is expected to lose. Jamie Harrison is the Democratic nominee against Senator Lindsey Graham. He's probably one of the most well-known senators nationwide, Democrat or Republican, and he is in a very competitive race. I mean, Jamie Harrison, I'll tell you this, has raised the most money for any Senate candidate in one quarter in history, $36 million. That is so much money. In a state as small as South Carolina, I mean, Jamie Harrison has the necessary funds to fund the neighboring North Carolina and both Georgia Senate elections. I mean, South Carolina is a very easy market for you to spend money in. It has less population than my home state of Maryland. So South Carolina, I think that Jamie Harrison is going to do very well, but I think Lindsey Graham is still the favorite, which may be unfortunate for the Democrats, but I don't really know what they were expecting out of South Carolina. Obviously, they will probably do well in one of these lean Republican races that I'm characterizing today. But as it stands, I would say that all 4 of these go to the GOP. So Montana is the next state to add to the Republican list. And the reason why I'm including Montana is because Steve Daines, while relatively unknown, is still a Republican incumbent. The incumbency factor definitely helps nominees in this race. If you take a look at Jon Tester, Steve Bullock, I'd say, is a better candidate than Jon Tester, but he was the incumbent, and the factor of the incumbency in this state holds a lot of weight. While the presidential race is expected to go to Donald Trump, maybe not as large as it was in 2016, the Senate race still isn't expected to go to the Democrats, even though they have a history of breaking their ticket and the popular Democratic governor is running. Legislating is different than serving as a governor. As many failed governor to Senate bids have shown you, Montana itself there is a lot of faith from Democrats in this race that they will elect a Democrat to the governorship. It probably won't happen, but it's realistic. The House race is also competitive, and, the Senate race is still competitive, but I'd say the GOP is the favorite to win all three currently. And while the margin may be narrower than where it was in 2016 in terms of the presidential race, at the end of the day, that doesn't mean much if it's not contributing to a down-ballot race win. Most notably, the Senate race. So the GOP wins Montana. They win South Carolina, Kansas, Alaska, Texas, Mississippi, and Alabama. That puts them at 47. Now for the Democrats, I'd say their next lean Democratic seat is the state of North Carolina. This is a state where the Democratic Party isn't expected or previously was not expected to win. Cal Cunningham had a scandal that really could have brought down his campaign, and based on the way he was handling it, it was very possible that the GOP did reclaim a lead here, but Tom Tillis, for whatever reason, is not performing as well as he should be. It is a presidential election year, and if North Carolina does end up going for Donald Trump, it is much harder for Cal Cunningham to win. But if Biden wins North Carolina, it's a done deal for Cal Cunningham. He wins the Senate race. So North Carolina, at this point, I'd say will vote to the left of it's North Carolina, the presidential election in this state. But regardless, I think that both Joe Biden and Cal Cunningham will win North Carolina today, especially with the turnout levels that we've seen across the country. If you want to see turnout levels, take a look at Texas, 95% of 2016 turnout with 5 days till the election. So that's important, but that's also besides the point. North Carolina goes lean for the Democrats. Now, I have a tilt state. All the rest of the races are going to be considered tilt. These are races that are going to be decided by less than 1%, which really means they could go either way. The Democrats are only at 50 based off lean, likely, and safe, which means they need to solidify that lean 2 states and then, expand. And obviously, there's 5 days left. It's much harder to do that compared to obviously 2 months out. But I will say that the Democratic Party is doing very well. If they win the presidency and they're at 50, well, then they win the majority. But I think the Democrats might really want to avoid having to use a newly elected Vice President Kamala Harris as a tiebreaker. So the Democrats are leading in North Carolina and Maine. But right now, I think the Republican Party is narrowly ahead in the state of Georgia. This is a very competitive race. David Perdue is the Republican incumbent. And while he is on track to victory, it's not without trouble. He, didn't exactly have the most stellar debate performance against Jon Ossoff. And while Jon Ossoff doesn't exactly have, political history outside of local races, the only thing that the Republican Party can really hit Jon Ossoff on is experience because his track record is pretty clean. Karen Handel already went through that. And, while she did defeat him, it was a special election. Literally a year and a half later, the Democratic Party won back that seat. That seat was literally held by Newt Gingrich. So the GOP shouldn't exactly be super worried about Jon Ossoff. Now, it's possible he wins, but David Perdue is the favorite. And we probably will see some of these Republicans outperform what the data is telling us. But for right now, I'd say Georgia is a tilt Republican state. Now, for the Democrats, I'd say Iowa is actually a tilt Democratic state. I think that this race moves down from being lean. I characterized it as lean 7 days ago, I believe, and now it's back down to being tilt. It's closer than before, but the Democrats are still the narrow favorite. And while that may, disagree with your own personal prediction, I advise you to take a look at the numbers and really jump into the state's demographics. I really don't think that the Democratic Party will win all 3 Senate races, all 3 House races, and then lose the 1 Senate race. But, in 2018, the governorship did go to the Republicans, despite the rest of the state going blue. So Iowa's kind of weird. It probably won't go to Biden, but Teresa Greenfield will probably outperform him. And the final state to be characterized has already been characterized because there are 2 Senate races up, and that is the battleground state of Georgia. This is a state that I've been, excited about for quite some time now because it's an additional race that I get to cover past the election, assuming it doesn't go into an automatic majority with the Democrat Raphael Warnock. But I think past the election, now it'll probably be changed if Biden wins the election, but assuming that we do have a runoff past the election, just because of the low quality level of the candidates and Raphael Warnock's ability to coalesce the Democratic Party in the final stretch of the campaign season, combined the Republicans have 42, combined the Democrats have 49 today, I'd say that Michigan's Senate special election is actually now tilt for the Democrats. Now, if Biden wins, this could actually be the first referendum against a newly elected President Biden, but it'd also be held in December. So Donald Trump would still be in office and the Democrats would have plenty of ammunition, and they would have, time to bring about support for Raphael Warnock. Now, he was immediately discounted in the beginning. Lieberman was the frontrunner for the Democrats, but now, following President Obama's endorsement and a number of other notable Democrats, it seems that Raphael Warnock is on track to do very well in the Georgia Senate special election. And because of Kelly Loeffler with her insider trading, and because of Doug Collins, who probably won't be winning over a number of Kelly Loeffler supporters, at least they won't be voting for him. They probably just won't vote at all. We've seen such an ideological split between these two candidates, maybe not necessarily policy-wise, but in their campaign tactics and, whether one is too conservative or too liberal for the other. But, the Georgia Senate special election, I've seen a lot more Republicans attacking Republicans than Democrats versus Republicans, which at the end of the day benefits the Democrats if they have one clear candidate, which they do. So the final map ends up with Democrats at 52 to the Republicans 48. But technically it should be 51 to 48 because we don't know what will happen with the presidential election, and that would change my determination of the Georgia Senate special election. But you do have to realize who Raphael Warnock would likely be going against. Regardless of the top two, he would have a very good run against them if he wasn't able to win. And obviously, if he wins, then a great run against them. So that's the final map. We have flips in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, North Carolina, Maine, and Alabama. One to the Republicans, 5 to the Democrats, a net gain of 4 for the Democratic Party, with one race that we're considering to be a toss-up just because the presidential election really determines it. But if I was to call it today, I'd say tilt for the Democrats. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a number of Senate videos that you can watch. Again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please consider joining as a member on my channel, and I will see you all tomorrow.